dust was finer here, not the kind that clung in clumps to windowsills or settled lazily on wooden beams. No, this dust was sacred. It shimmered faintly in the shafts of light that pierced the narrow stained-glass windows of the lower crypt. It coated the parchment like a veil of age, as though the words beneath it had grown weary of being read and wished only to sleep. You moved quietly between the shelves. Not because anyone was listening, no one ever came down here, but because silence felt expected, like the stone itself had grown accustomed to secrets and would not welcome noise that didn't belong. For the past 9 months this had been your domain, a cavernous, forgotten wing of St. Aurelius Church, hidden beneath layers of incense and liturgy. The upper clergy had little interest in records, and the villagers saw the archives as a place of the dead. But you liked it here. There was comfort in the order of things, baptisms filed by decade, deaths recorded in the careful script of long-dead scribes, ink faded into memory. It was during one of these long, unbroken hours, cataloging 18th-century correspondences between parish leaders and soldiers of a nearby garrison, that you found it. Tucked between a hymnal and an unlabeled book of chants was a thin roll of vellum, brittle at the edges. You unspooled it slowly, expecting more genealogy. Instead, it was a floor plan. The church's floor plan, to be exact, but not the one you'd seen etched in brass near the narthex. This one was older, hand-drawn, annotated in Latin, and in the lower corner, near where the eastern crypt met the sacristy, there was a marking you'd never seen before. Camera silente, beneath it a line scribbled in darker ink, more recent, as if added hastily, "Do not enter, not for the archivist." You blinked, there was no room there. You had walked that corridor dozens of times, moving from ledger room to prayer alcove. The walls were solid stone, impossibly thick, there was no door, no threshold, and yet, you ran your fingers along the map again, the lines were deliberate. Not imagined, whoever had drawn this knew the church as it was and as it had been. The air in the archive seemed colder then, not from draft or open window. No, colder, like a presence had drawn near, curious, watching, waiting. You rolled the map back up and placed it beside you on the desk, heart thrumming. For the first time since you began working here, the silence didn't feel sacred. It felt like warning. You didn't sleep that night, not for lack of trying. You boiled the tea leaves just the way Sister Agnes had shown you, 3 minutes steeped, never more. You paced between your small bed and the cracked window overlooking the cemetery. You opened the worn copy of Psalms on your nightstand, even traced your fingers over the dog-eared pages like a blind man searching for vision. But the vellum burned in your mind. Camera silente, the room of silence. Not for the archivist, you told yourself you wouldn't go looking, that the warning was enough. That curiosity had no place in sacred spaces, but you'd already failed. The next morning, before the sun had fully warmed the cobblestones of the courtyard, you were back in the eastern crypt, palms sweaty, a lantern trembling in your hand. The corridor stretched out before you just as it always had, stone, unbroken, untouched. You ran your hand along the left wall, fingertips grazing uneven mortar and chill. Nothing, but on the right. There was a seam, you would have missed it had you not stared for so long, an impossibly thin vertical line, jagged like a scar, running from floor to ceiling. It wasn't carved, it was exposed, like the wall had once been whole, and someone had peeled back a layer of time to reveal what was hidden beneath. You tapped it. A dull sound, but softer than the rest of the stone. You pressed your palm flat the way you'd once seen a mason test for hollows, then both hands leaned in and felt it, not movement exactly, more like resistance giving way, a sigh beneath the surface. The wall shifted, only slightly. But it was enough, a breath of stale air exhaled into the corridor, dry and strange. You stepped back instinctively. The lantern's flame flickered, stretching shadows in unnatural shapes. There was a door now, small. Rounded at the top like a monk's hood. No handle, no hinges, just a single word carved into the lintel, reminiscere. Latin, remember, you didn't remember opening it. Only that your fingers moved, touched the center, and the stone yielded, not like a door swinging on hinges, but like a memory surfacing from somewhere deep. Soundless, smooth. The darkness inside was complete. Not black, but thick, like the very air had forgotten light. Your lantern barely pierced it, but you stepped forward, heart in your throat, feet unsure. The moment you crossed the threshold, the silence grew dense, oppressive. The stone absorbed every sound, your breath, the creak of your boots, even the flutter of fear in your chest. The door closed behind you, not with a slam, not with a click, just absence, as though the hallway had never existed at all. And in the stillness, something began to whisper, not aloud, not in your ears, but inside you, and it whispered your name. The whisper wasn't like a voice, it had no weight, no sound. It was more like a shape inside your mind. A thought you didn't author, a feeling you didn't invite, yet there it was, blooming behind your eyes like light behind closed lids. It spoke your name, not the name others used, but the one you barely remembered from childhood. The one only your mother had whispered in the dark when fever racked your body and she begged heaven not to take you. You froze, and the room welcomed that stillness, folding it into itself. The air was unmoving. And yet every hair on your arm stood upright, as if something had passed too close without touching you. You tried to step back, your foot didn't move, not out of paralysis, not out of fear, out of invitation. It felt like the stone beneath your feet had accepted you, that to leave now would be to betray something old, something sacred, or perhaps something watching. The chamber stretched wider than you expected, impossible, given the structure above. You held up the lantern and its flickering light landed on the edges of wooden shelves, but they weren't filled with books. They were filled with relics, not golden chalices or bones of saints. No, these were stranger, quieter things. A faded ribbon, a glass eye, a torn page with one word inked in blood red, obligatus. You couldn't name the feeling that stirred in your chest, reverence and dread, braided so tightly together that they felt like a single breath. In the far corner of the room stood a pedestal, stone, smooth, atop it a single object, a journal, bound in leather so aged it looked almost fossilized. You approached, unwilling and unable not to. When your fingers touched the cover, it felt warm, not like heat but like life. The scent of it filled your lungs, parchment, ash, a hint of rain long fallen, and as you opened it, the room didn't brighten or shift, the light didn't dance. But the words on the page seemed to recognize you, to expect you. The ink was familiar. The handwriting was your own. You blinked, your breath caught. The first line read, "I was never meant to find this room again. And beneath it. But if I am reading these words, then I've forgotten what I was made to remember." You dropped the journal. It landed with a muted thud, kicking up a cloud of ancient dust. You stumbled back, mouth dry, thoughts skittering like mice from light. How could this be? How could something written in your hand be older than your memory? The journal lay open now, its pages fluttering despite the still air. And the whisper returned, louder this time, but still inside you. You promised you would never come back. And now you had. You stared at the journal lying open on the floor, the pages still shifting as though caught in a wind that didn't exist. You didn't want to touch it again, but you couldn't seem to look away either. The letters blurred for a moment, like ink bleeding into water, and then reformed. New lines appeared. You were certain they weren't there before. The mind forgets what the soul cannot bear, but the soul always finds its way back. You swallowed hard. The lantern in your hand had begun to dim, not from lack of oil, but like the darkness itself was swallowing the flame. You tried to focus on something rational, something real, the structure of the room, the materials, the record of it all, but none of this was in any of the church's blueprints. None of it was in the ledgers, the parchments, the sealed vaults. And yet your name was in this book, your handwriting, your thoughts, unless they were never your thoughts to begin with. You crouched slowly and picked the book up again, your hands trembling. The next page had a sketch done in hurried charcoal. A doorway, the same arch, the same word carved above, reminiscere. Beneath the sketch, a diagram, lines drawn from the arch like roots, weaving through something that looked eerily like the map of the crypt itself, except here there were other rooms. 7, to be exact, marked only by symbols you didn't recognize. But you understood one thing immediately. This room wasn't unique. It was one of many, and you had just stepped into a network. The journal continued. If you find one, you awaken the others. If you write this down, you bind yourself again. The church will never admit the rooms exist, but they know, they always knew. You flipped the page with shaking fingers. The next line was shorter. And colder, the room remembers, even if you don't. The whisper was behind your ear now, not in your head, not imagined, breath against your neck, real, and it said in a voice that cracked like old wood, "Welcome back." You ran. Not in a frenzied, flailing panic, no, that would have made too much sense. You moved like someone trying to outrun a dream they were still inside of. Your steps were cautious, precise, but hurried. Your lantern flickered wildly in your grasp as you traced your path back through the narrow corridor, each stone wall now feeling narrower, closer, as if the crypt itself was breathing in. The door hadn't closed behind you, but it should have. That was the first thing you noticed. You had felt it open. You had felt the weight of centuries resisting your push. But now it stood ajar, silent, as though it had never been shut at all. You stepped through it, heart hammering like a bell struck out of time. When you turned around to glance back, just for a second, you almost wished you hadn't. The archway was gone, just stone now, solid, unbroken wall, no symbol. No seam, not even dust disturbed by passage. You reached out and knocked on the stone, once, twice. The sound came back muted, thick, final. You hadn't closed the door, the room had closed itself. Still gripping the journal, you backed away slowly, spine cold with a dread that wouldn't leave. It had followed you out, not the voice, not the vision, but the knowing. You weren't just an archivist anymore. You were a participant. And something had been waiting for you to remember. Back in your small office beneath the belfry, you locked the door and drew every curtain. You placed the journal on your desk but couldn't bring yourself to open it again. Not yet. Instead, you rummaged through the registry cabinet, records of every priest, every death, every exorcism, every buried relic. You scanned for anything that mentioned the word reminiscere, but the word wasn't in Latin indexes. It wasn't in the sacramental logs, it wasn't even whispered in the margins. But then, at the back of an old vellum map of the cathedral's catacombs, you saw it, a symbol, small, faded, hidden beneath what looked like water damage. It was the same shape you'd seen in the journal's diagram, a line bisecting a circle, 7 dots, 6 faint, one glowing red. It had been marked recently. That ink was still bright, still wet when you touched it, and it wasn't you who drew it. A chill ran up your neck. You turned back to the journal and finally opened it again. The page had turned on its own, and now it simply read, "The first door remembers, the others are waking." And beneath it, etched lightly into the leather edge of the page, "You still have the key, you always did." You looked down at your hand, and there around your neck, something you hadn't noticed before, a small pendant, smooth, cold. When you touched it, the metal pulsed once, and behind you, something knocked on the inside of the wall. You didn't scream. There was something about a knock that comes from the inside of a sealed wall that doesn't permit screaming. It demands stillness, reverence, like the space itself has become sacred, but not in a way that offers comfort or salvation. Sacred like a tomb, like the moment just before burial when everyone holds their breath. You pressed your hand to the stone, feeling nothing but the rough grain of age and ash. The pendant around your neck pulsed once more, faint, like a heartbeat trying to decide whether or not it should return. You didn't remember owning this pendant. That was the part that frightened you more than the knock. It wasn't ornate. Just a simple, circular brass piece about the size of a coin. You unclasped it and brought it to the flickering light. There was an engraving on one side, faint but unmistakable. A pendulum, swinging left to right, frozen in mid-arc. On the other side, nothing, smooth as glass. Except when you held it closer, your breath fogging the surface, a pattern began to reveal itself in the condensation. Letters, 3 of them, VAR. You didn't know what it meant, but your stomach turned as though a part of you did. You tucked the pendant away and turned to the journal again. A new page had written itself. This time, the words were longer, careful. Like someone had taken the time to explain, if not to comfort, then to warn. Each room remembers a sin the church erased, a truth buried too deep for history, but not for memory. There are 7, each tied to a virtue. Each housing what was once called a miracle, before they became something else. You felt yourself beginning to sway, not from dizziness, but from something deeper. Like a pendulum in your mind had begun to move, and it wanted you to follow the arc. Left, right, memory, doubt. The silence in your room was too thick now. You stood and opened the window to let in air, but the moment the cold night wind touched your skin, you heard it. The voice, clear, soft, directly behind you, "Archivist." You turned, no one, but the candle had gone out, and the journal was burning, not with fire, but with light. A slow glow from the center outward, each letter illuminated like gold leaf in divine scripture. It began to hum not with sound, but with vibration, like a choir singing inside your bones. Then it stopped, and the room was still again. You picked up the book, but the light had vanished. The words remained, but they were different now. "You're not the first to wake, but you might be the last." And at the bottom, something written in ink darker than any you'd ever seen. VAR is not a name, it is a vow. You looked again at the pendant, and somehow now it felt heavier. Like a burden you had unknowingly carried your whole life, and just begun to remember. You didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, though it throbbed gently beneath your ribs like an aching drum. Not even because of the voice which still whispered your title, Archivist, as if it had always belonged to someone else and had finally returned to you. No, you stayed awake because every time you closed your eyes, you saw the map, the symbol. The ink that bled without touch, and you couldn't escape the weight of that final sentence. VAR is not a name, it is a vow. You searched the cathedral archives until dawn. Dust choked the shelves like cobwebs spun by time itself. You passed over documents older than the country, transcripts written in Latin, Greek, a few in languages you didn't recognize but had learned to handle like sacred glass. Nothing said VAR, nothing used that acronym. But something tugged you back to the Registry of Ordination, a book you'd flipped through countless times when preparing sermons or tracing clerical lineage, a book that never felt particularly haunted until that morning. You opened it, and noticed for the first time that the pages had been rebound, not all just one section. Page 117 to 130, newer thread, newer glue, still aged with tea or fire to look uniform, but not the same. You loosened the binding with a knife and peeled the pages gently back. Between the seams, wedged between page 122 and 123, you found a folded slip of parchment. Yellowed, cracked with three symbols stamped into it, a pendulum, a veil, a root. Below them, words handwritten in a flowing, measured script, vault of anointed remnants. Admission must be earned, not inherited. The door opens only to those who still believe in silence. You read it 3 times, each slower than the last. Vault of anointed remnants. VAR, a vow, a place, a memory too sacred or too dangerous to speak aloud. You felt the shape of the pendant beneath your shirt again, and this time it didn't just throb, it pulled, like a compass trying to return north. And in that moment, you realized something you hadn't dared admit until now. The door you had opened was not the door, it was the first of several, and whatever you had awakened beneath this cathedral, it wasn't finished. You rose from your desk, fingers curled tightly around the pendant, and moved with new purpose through the corridor behind the apse. Past the crypt, past the broken wall, past where the old statues of forgotten saints had been stored like shameful memories. You stopped at the farthest door in the hall, a rusted iron gate you had passed 100 times and never tried. It wasn't locked, it never had been. Inside, the stairs led down, farther than they should, and carved into the wall just above the descent, as though waiting all along, were 3 words, whisper archivist, enter. And so you did. There was no echo in the stairwell. That was the first thing you noticed. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was something active, almost alive. It pressed against your ears like water, like pressure, like the space itself wanted to remind you that down here, words were not welcome. It didn't matter how deep you descended, each footstep was swallowed instantly, devoured by the walls, by the air, by something older than stone. Your hand grazed the railing, though it was less a rail and more a cold, iron cord embedded into the wall, twisting, spiraling, knotted like it had been forged with intent. With meaning, you kept your fingers on it, half out of balance, half out of superstition. It felt like a spine, like the vertebrae of something buried. As you went deeper, the temperature dropped, but not sharply. It was gradual, like someone turning a dial too slowly for you to notice. You stopped shivering, you stopped sweating. Eventually, you stopped noticing the cold altogether, and you began to wonder whether it was you that had changed, or the corridor itself that had begun to acclimate you to its indifference. Then you saw the carvings. They didn't begin at the top, but around the 33rd step. Fine lines at first, scratched perhaps, then deeper, more deliberate, symbols, shapes. They weren't letters, not in any alphabet you recognized. But they had rhythm, flow, breath. Each mark was spaced precisely, too precise to be madness, too disjointed to be code. You passed a sequence that looked like a tree, then one like an open eye, and then you came to the door. Not a door actually, a frame, a vast arch carved into the stone, no wood or handle or hinges, just an absence, an opening where something used to be. It was black beyond it, not dark, black. There was a difference. Darkness still has depth, the hint of shape or color or air. This was void, like looking into a thought that hadn't yet formed. You stepped forward. The pendant flared against your chest, hot, sharp. You winced and pulled it out, letting it dangle in your palm. Its once smooth surface had changed. Lines had appeared etched into it, a new shape, a door with a pendulum drawn above it. The pendant had become a key. But what it unlocked wasn't a lock, it was permission. You took a breath and crossed the threshold. Instantly something shifted, not in the world but in you. A sensation like memory, but not yours, washed over your skin, a child's laugh. A distant scream, bells ringing underwater, a prayer said in a language that never belonged to this earth. They weren't visions, they weren't hallucinations, they were residues. You had entered the vault, and the vault had begun to read you back. At first, it felt like walking into a breath held for centuries. The air inside the vault was still, not dead, not stagnant, but reverent. Like even the dust had been instructed to stay quiet. Your footsteps didn't echo here. They were absorbed, as if the floor had long since decided that sound was too dangerous a thing to allow. Every sense in your body rebelled at once. Your ears strained toward silence so thick it rang. Your eyes tried to find edges in a space that didn't quite have any, and your lungs hesitated before each inhale, as if asking permission. The chamber was vast, but it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. The walls were layered in rows, almost like catacomb shelves, but instead of bones they held books, journals, scrolls. Fragments of parchment, some wrapped in twine, others sealed with wax that cracked and wept as you passed. No labels, no titles, just spines too worn to read, too sacred to touch casually. Each one hummed faintly, like it remembered being written by a hand that bled truth and was punished for it. You moved carefully between them, your eyes skimming the uneven geometry of the archive. The further you walked, the more the structure seemed to shift. Shelves curved. A corridor that should have ended opened sideways instead. The geometry disagreed with reality. You were no longer just beneath the cathedral. You were somewhere else. And then you saw it at the very center of the room. A pedestal. On it sat a single tome. Black leather, fastened with iron clasps tarnished to the green of old blood. and carved into its cover the three symbols you now knew too well. Pendulum, veil, root. You didn't touch it, not at first, because some part of you, a part buried so deep it had no language, knew that this book remembered you, not just you now, but every version of you that had come before. Every quiet thought you deburied in cathedral walls, every time you had paused mid-transcription and wondered if what you were copying was truth or containment. But the pendant burned again, demanded, so you placed your palm over the seal. And the book opened itself, not with the weight of age, but with the precision of a door unlocked. The first page had no writing, just a charcoal drawing of your face, not as you look now, not exactly, but close enough, your eyes hollowed. Your mouth stitched, and below it a sentence written in that same heavy script: "He who keeps the memory must eventually become the memory." And in that moment the vault whispered your name back to you, not as it was written in church records, not even as your mother once called you, but the name you had never spoken aloud. The name that the door upstairs had carved in silence: archivist, and now anointed. You didn't remember sitting down, but your knees ached as if you'd been kneeling for hours, maybe days. Time inside the vault had become something elastic, something ambient, like light filtered through stained glass. It no longer ticked forward, it pressed like slow gravity, pulling memory down into marrow. The book remained open before you. Its pages turned on their own now, not with the wind, there was no wind, but with will, each sheet whispering as it turned, as if reluctant to show you more. And yet they did. You saw entries written in dozens of hands. Some inked, some carved, some burned. Each entry recorded not history as the world knew it, but truths that had been hidden beneath history. The sins of popes no one remembered. The names of saints who were never canonized because their visions were too accurate. And in between these entries, sketches, crude, beautiful, terrifying. A woman kneeling at a river of teeth, a tower made of mouths. A boy with no eyes holding a lantern filled with screaming light, and again your face, drawn on the final page, this time older, your eyes closed, your mouth sealed, a script surrounding your likeness like a halo of thorns. He who reads the room will one day be read by it. The vault was not just a place of memory, it was a mirror, and you had passed through. You had been recorded, not in ink, not in flesh, but in the unseen lines of this place. Then came the sound, soft at first, like breath under stone, a vibration beneath your feet. The walls began to pulse slowly, subtly, as if they too had a heartbeat. Books fell silent, pages stilled. And in the center of the room, beneath the pedestal, a seam appeared in the floor. A rectangle, stone, chiseled edges, a slab. You didn't have to open it to know what it was. A tomb, and carved into its surface your name, not the one you had now. The one you would have. You stepped back, the pendant around your neck felt heavier now. Cold, you reached for it, only to find it fused to your skin, no longer separate. It had chosen, or perhaps the room had chosen through it. And that's when the whisper returned, not in your ears, in your bones. You are not here to archive the truth, you are here to join it. The vault had no need for scribes anymore. It needed a guardian, a vessel. A witness too complete to be human. You looked up and found no door. There was no going back, only forward through ink and stone and memory. And as the vault dimmed to silence once again, you finally understood. This room had never not existed. It had only been waiting for you.